to be able to take us through our webinar this morning. So Victor, karibu sana, and everyone enjoy and have a good time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doreen. Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you once again, as always, for sparing time to join us for this webinar series. We really do not take it for granted. We really appreciate your time. As I think this month we have burdened you more than usual. This is our second in this month, and we'll try and keep them a bit more regular. But as Doreen has said, today we're going to talk about emerging areas of concern in legal and governance audits. Victor and I are going to run you through 12 exciting things, what we reckon forms, for us at least, interesting things that we are monitoring as we continue experiencing the world in and around legal and governance audits. Of course, as you may know, we have had the privilege over time to support many of you now in legal and governance audits periodically, oftentimes across a year or 2-year cycles, required either by board charter, board requirements, or for those in the public sector, governance requirements for governance and legal audits. As those of us may know, of course, Mongozo that runs through, public sector governance. But also internally in terms of just good practice for listed companies. Also, there's a general requirement for regular audits in defined cycles. So we have had the privilege of supporting you through that over time. That, of course, has given us the benefit of seeing what is top of the list for you in terms of concern whenever we are conducting legal and governance audits. It has also given us the privilege of identifying gaps every so often as we run through your compliance cycles and your culture as a culture in terms of governance within your institutions. And most importantly, has given us the opportunity also to get a feel of generally what the market seems to be responding more towards as the field in and around legal and governance audit changes. So that has sort of led us to reducing this into 12 main areas that Victor and I will be speaking to you about. We welcome you to engage us on this, exchange notes with us on this question, chip in as we walk through this discussion today. But most importantly, pick this discussion away from this webinar today and more into discussions that we shall be having with you as we engage each other going forward. So let me just run through what we're going to talk about today in a very cursory way before we get into detailed review of each of them. Of course, top of the list for us, this is anchored by the principal question of the fact that more and more we are now seeing a lot of worry in terms of the fact that there is quite a bit of regulatory fragmentation. That is to say, you find a lot of compliance requirements sitting all over the place, all right? And so that may oftentimes give you a lot of headache in terms of what do you need to remain compliant with? How do you ensure that you do that? But most importantly, how do you monitor those changes? So that really anchors our discussion for today. All right. We'll have a mix of this in terms of what we talk about from a governance perspective and we talk about it from a legal perspective. So we'll not isolate them. We may mix them in there, but nonetheless trying to ensure that we have them from that broad point of view. So the top of the list, of course, is regulatory fragmentation, and we shall get into that as we close the discussion. That then flows into the second thing, which is artificial intelligence governance, ethics and risk management. This is an interesting one for us because as we sit currently, AI tools are things that we've already deployed within our business units. This is not new to us. What perhaps would be new is regulation. As you're aware, currently in the country at least, we already have an artificial intelligence strategy. We have sort of leapfrogged, and now we are discussing a bill that is currently before one house of parliament. And so very soon we will find ourselves in a space where we do not even move into the typical cycles of a strategy into a policy, but now we'll have a regulatory environment in and around artificial intelligence. So most of us may be anxious as we are currently because we're already employing these tools within our workspaces. It's already enabling us quite efficiently within our workspaces. Even as we speak now in this webinar, we are using a tool as a note taker that is enabled by artificial intelligence. So many of us are waiting with bated breath to see whether or not regulation will be disruptive in terms of what we are doing already, asking us to claw back, or whether it will be enabling. So that is something that we're going to be talking about, and we are more and more seeing as we talk about governance and legal audits. We're also going to talk about environmental social governance. This already has been there in our tongues for quite a while, but still remains a topical issue that is live for us. Because as you remember now, being good corporate citizens is top of the list for many businesses and entities. So we shall be talking about that, and essentially flowing more into what does sustainability and corporate governance mean for us, and how do we remain compliant. Of course, as we always also said, we're going to talk about data protection and data breach responses. Data protection enforcement is something, data protection generally we have spoken about for a long time, but we're going to give it a new twist this time around in terms of enforcement and breach responses. We've had the privilege of engaging in a few of them in the recent past, and we've earned quite a bit of knowledge that we want to share with you in terms of what to do, how to do it, and most importantly, how to ensure that you are monitoring your compliance so that in the event you have a breach, you can respond to it adequately, but most importantly, you can interface with the regulator, the ODPC, in a way that is meaningful for the regulators. We're not going to talk about the typical compliance from a data protection perspective. We are more going to be talking about making our businesses ready in the event of any enforcement requirement or in the event of the requirement for response to a breach. Equally there, tied to that is digital resilience and cybersecurity. This, I think, goes without saying, has been a topical issue for a while, still remains top of the list. We shall be talking about that, or more or less self-explanatory. Anti-money laundering, countering financing of terrorism also is going to be there. I think now we're all aware there's a regulator who's out there. Those of us in the financial services sector have interacted with this regulator for a while. And now with more and more, we are seeing compliance requirements. I'm sure somewhere in your inbox where you're sitting, you may have received an email from FRC asking you to run through a screening, do a screening of those you handle some finances for. Those may be appearing on that list for you. So there's a compliance environment that is fairly active currently. We'll be talking about that. Very quickly, again, stakeholder expectation, culture, and ethics. We now more and more find ourselves in a business environment where the public expects you to participate, to interact with them in a way that is beyond commerce. They expect you to more and more be a true corporate citizen that reflects their ethics, that behaves in a way that they feel and want. So we shall be talking about that and what that means for us. That is more on the governance front of our discussion today. Then, of course, now we have tied to the regulatory fragmentation issue. We now have, of course, an active shift from compliance to risk management, because we find ourselves in a space where regulation now is more and more a case of what you do more than what you ought to do. So we have regulators who are very proactive in terms of just trying to see to it that we act in a proper manner through and through. Then, of course, related party transactions will be an interesting one for us to talk about today, very commercial in its nature. We'll speak about that when we talk about legal. Of course, board effectiveness, a typical governance topic that we shall be talking about, and we find more and more today, is a question that we ask ourselves as we do governance audits. Of course, transparency and public participation speaks very closely to stakeholder expectation, culture, and ethics. We shall be talking about that. And then, of course, finally, procurement and contract integrity. And so with that, allow me then to go straight in to the first item, which is artificial intelligence governance, ethics, and risk frameworks. So, of course, this comes from the principal front that we are aware that these are tools that we already deploy in our day-to-day places of work. It is not new to us. We do not expect in any way perhaps to claw back on the gains that we already benefited from deploying AI tools within our workspaces. Of course, we have had a bit of conversation with you in the recent past, couple of 6 months or so, just trying to rationalize what you have within your business units as against the National Artificial Intelligence Strategy. Fairly young document in its own nature, but then again, now we are seeing very quickly, we have a bill before Parliament, the Artificial Intelligence Bill 2026, which is being fairly fast-tracked. So we'd be expecting that before the close of year, we will have this as an act of Parliament. Flowing from that as an act of Parliament, of course, there'll be a series of regulations in there. What many of us, of course, are hoping is that those regulations will look and feel like the National Artificial Intelligence Strategy, which, for all purposes and intent, we consider to be a document that fosters the use of artificial intelligence solutions within the business place. The only worry is that the Act, as currently is, seems to be a bit removed from that path that had been taken. The Act, of course, as any Act of Parliament ordinarily would be, is more or less a bit restrictive. Of course, currently, memoranda is being accepted before Parliament, from different quarters, we're seeing a lot of comments coming in. But most importantly, just to ensure that even as that happens, even as we're in the build phase of things, we remain aware of the fact that there's a likelihood of a shakeup of some sort should the act come in its current nature. All right. Away from that, of course, is a question of accountability and decision making generally. As we are reviewing the bill currently, one of the curious things that comes out for us, which of course we now bring into the legal audit, is the question of automated decision making. This, of course, is the interaction between the AI strategy as against the Data Protection Act and, of course, the national, and of course, what is currently in the AI bill. The Data Protection Act would ordinarily requires as a base minimum that there ought not be any element of artificial decision making, in the sense that you can use all manner of computer tools to make processes efficient for you, but at the level of decision making, that ought to be left to individuals to take decisions, natural persons to take decisions within our business units. Of course, this at times is not the easiest of things, looks easier said, but from a compliance perspective, it may be challenging more than anything else. So, of course, top of the list as we talk about artificial intelligence and why we reckon it's a topical issue for us, principally flows back to the question of automated decision making. So this is something that we ought to remain vigilant over. Those of us who are sitting in different legal functions within our businesses, as we talk to our technical teams in ICT, our technical teams in business and innovation, our technical teams in, wherever it may be, R&D, wherever it may be, as we deploy these tools, the one thing that we must speak about constantly is the element of automated decision making. Second to that, of course, is the question of where is data hosted. Of course, we are aware of the fact that AI use is very data heavy, and you'll have to use a service provider. There is, of course, the requirement of data hosting. We shall also be talking about this as we flow over to the question of data protection enforcement and breach responses. The question of hosting becomes very critical because of the technical requirement of having an element of hosting within country anytime we talk about data belonging to citizens of the Republic of Kenya, of course, because we have a very territorial bit of legislation in that regard. Of course, the hope still remains, and we wait for the regulator, the ODPC at least, to come back to us with the publication detailing which countries will be whitelisted for expropriation of data outside of Kenya. Of course, that will give us a bit of ease. All right. Third, of course, as we talk about artificial intelligence, which you cannot ignore, is cybersecurity and the breach risk appertaining to that. As we use these tools within our institutions, every time we do our audits, particularly for governance audit, these are questions that we always talk about when we speak to the ICT teams, just trying to ensure that everyone remains vigilant on the question of data security. Perhaps, Doreen, could you help me again just with the housekeeping?
Thanks. Sure, Brian. Just proceed.
All right, thank you. Great. All right, now moving on then to the second item in our list, which is environmental, social governance, sustainability, and of course, touch flowing in their corporate governance. I think we have spoken about this time and again. We just want to highlight a key element in here, which now we see from a deliberate regulatory front, and that is from the National Environmental Management Authority, particularly for those in the manufacturing sector. This, first of all, speaks about, we are speaking from the front of sustainability. We now have a deliberate monitoring. Of course, currently it is considered voluntary, but we've seen the regulator